Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Trauma-Informed Care Toolkit for Youth Service Providers. We're going to start with just some quick introductions, and I see many of you are putting that introduction into the chat. So please feel free to introduce yourself, and we're going to introduce ourselves as the speakers. My name is Andrew Palomo. I go by he, him, his, or el. I'm the Director of Community Strategies here at the National Network, and I have the privilege today of co-presenting with Asia Ellington, founder and CEO of a mentoring program, Free Your Wings Youth Mentoring in Indiana. Also, Asia is a NYAC alum, so she was part of the National Youth Advisory Council for NN for Y, where she did a lot of advocacy work on the ground level for us. And now she also serves as a NYAC mentor. So she's mentoring the next generation of our NYAC members. This session is also really important for us because this is where we're trying to live out our values, right? And live out like what NN for Y has traditionally been, centering youth and young adult voices at the center of everything. And in this case, when we were asked to develop a toolkit for providers, why are we gonna contract out adults without lived experience, or and who are we gonna contract out? And I think we turn to Asia and Key, two of our NYAC members, and they're also fellow social workers. So Asia and I both have MSWs, and we were just like, why can't our NYAC alum be the ones who are driving the force and driving this toolkit forward? So I'm actually super excited that this came together, that we were able to use our former NYAC members to do this toolkit. Also, our NYAC members are more than qualified because they are MSW practitioners. They are social workers doing the work on the ground level, giving back to the community. So that's one of the reasons why this particular project was such a it was a great fit for us, and it just made sense that we would have our young leaders, our young adult leaders, be the driving force in doing this toolkit. So telling us, what is it the things that we need to know? What are the important things in terms of trauma-informed care that we need to know? So that's a little introduction. Asia, I know I spoke for you, so I don't know if you want to, if there was anything else I missed about your amazing biography and just resume.
Nope, I think you did perfect. Excited to be here and excited at the numbers of individuals you're joining. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I also just want to say that it's been an amazing journey, me working at the National Network and seeing your growth and going from that NYAC member to now you're a colleague, right? We work together, right? And I think that's been one of my favorite transitions so far here at NN for Y. So want to also thank you for taking the opportunity to continue to work with us, and then B, providing your great insight and knowledge to the field.
Well, thank you. And I think the growth also speaks values on the organization in itself, starting as a member and then going to become a mentor, and then now sitting on the board. I think it really shows the dedication that the organization as a whole has.
Oh, that's right. You are a board member now. I forgot that. Yeah, so don't fire me. I still want my job.
Oh, you're funny.
So for all of you who are on this call, and this might be your first NN for Y webinar, just a brief overview. We are one of the nation's oldest advocacy organizations that is dedicated to prevent and eradicating youth homelessness in the United States. So we've been around since the 70s. A lot of our original founders were the original architects of the of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. So there's a lot of history here of like that we've been pushing a lot of this agenda and a lot of this advocacy for such a long time. And yeah, and just we are a membership organization, so I know that like this is just a selfless plug, right? Like that, like this is we can only do this work because of members like you. I sound like the NPR membership drive, but it is true. Like our work, our community work, our work on the Hill, on advocacy is only done because of the organizations that are members and are helping us grow in that way, right? So just a reminder for those of you who are members, there are some perks here. Like you do get some free TA, you get some discounts on things, and you get like the members only newsletter, which gives out the policy breakdowns, etc. So just wanted to throw that out there. And if you're not a member, you should become a member. I do the TA work and I do the consulting work. So I do provide that for members. And so just reach out if any of you want, like in strategic planning, we do some consultations around building YABs, strategy, advice, even grant making, right? Like all of these stuff that we do. We are growing, so we're able to offer this more. So many of you on the call have experienced our consulting. We've been doing it for quite some time now, and I've been the main driver of this for the past 3 years. So got to see some of the people here. I saw someone from Kalispell, which out in Montana. We did some consulting work out in Montana for a year, and it was great getting to know all the great people in Montana. So just today's agenda. So just wanted to go over it, right? So we're just gonna bring overview of like trauma and stress, going over the adverse childhood experiences, going over complex trauma and its impact on youth experiencing homelessness. And then like trauma-informed care, how can it really be worked into your programs, into your everyday? And then some of those trauma screening and assessments. And I also just want to give a large little caveat, like trauma-informed care, and I know Asia is going to go over this, which is this webinar is, you're not going to go out and just be like, whew, well-informed, trauma-informed specialist after this, right? Like this is really an introduction, really like a broad overview, but it's really meant for it to be accessible to people, especially those new people that are working in there. And all of this is on a website. So at the end, I am going to provide a link and then also show you the website where this toolkit is going to be sitting at. We're moving away from actually having PDF or like printed out toolkits because no one actually looks at them. So we're hoping that a website might actually be better to give people that broad overview of what trauma-informed care is. So so we'll just go like before getting started, what should organizations know, right? So what are some of those things that like that we should take into consideration before we even start our work? So that's just something that like we'll have that discussion, and especially from Asia, right? Like I think that's a question for you, especially starting your own organization. What are some things organizations should know before they even get started in trauma, being trauma informed?
Definitely. So when committed to becoming trauma informed, it's important to understand that it's a long-term change. It's a long-term process. You know, you won't sit in this webinar and then tomorrow, hey, we're gonna implement this in our organization, our company, and we'll be good. You know, we'll have the deadline of next week and we're all trauma informed. It does not work like that. It takes a lot of time and commitment. Also realizing the widespread impact of trauma and identifying potential paths of recovery is very, very challenging work. So I always compare it to, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change. You must fully commit. If you're just doing it to look good, or if you're just doing it because, hey, this grant that I'm applying for requires us to be trauma informed, then you're essentially doing a disservice to the organization and those served. It takes a special approach. I mean, you need to commit the organization and staff, again, not just the participants. A trauma-informed approach, it really starts within, because you're working on yourself as well as assisting individuals with working on themselves. So this toolkit introduces you to trauma-informed care, but you still need to do more research and implement lots of trainings in your organization. Every organization is different in its unique culture. So what works for one space may not work for yours. So those are a couple of things that's just important to understand.
I was on mute, 3 years on Zoom and still muting myself. But I definitely love everything you just said, right? Like that, like adopting a trauma informed approach is not accomplished through a checklist, right? Like it really is like, how do we do this? It's organizational change, right? Like it really is a mindset of like of doing it. You can train your staff, you can like do all this stuff. People can read books on it, but like you really need to believe it and breathe it. And I think you're absolutely right. Like I think that's something like I've seen in my work and doing community work, that like some organizations say they're trauma informed, and then like I'm sitting there in their lobby, I'm like, this is not trauma informed whatsoever, right? Like and it's interesting, right? Like there's a disconnect between theory and then practice, right? Like, and I think that's something that I think what you brought up really well. And then just having that constant like assessment, right? Like I think we constantly have to check ourselves and say, hey, like are we doing it right? Right. And it's okay to make mistakes, right? Like I think that's something that like, hey, like I've made mistakes in 20 years of doing youth work. When I was like a young case manager, I was working in a transitional living program overnight, and I was like, what, 22, and like my residents were 18, and like, yeah, I was practically the same age as them, and of course I made mistakes, right? Like, and I think this is where like, how are we constantly assessing ourselves so we can improve on what we do? So love everything you said, and that's definitely something like I think organizations should definitely before they even like start doing, or even if your organization said, hey, yeah, we're trauma informed, I would then take a step back and be like, what's really needed? And everything you said, like investment, time, training, having the right supervision, all of that is 100%. So
Definitely. So Maxine Harris, 2004, describes a trauma-informed service system as a human services or healthcare system whose primary mission is altered by virtue of knowledge about trauma and the impact it has on the lives of consumers receiving services. This means looking at all aspects of programming through a trauma lens, constantly considering how traumatic experiences impact consumers. So Andrew, let me ask you this. What are some aspects in your work where you look at things differently and through a trauma-informed lens?
Oh, yeah. So I've had many roles, right? Like, so I think like this was easy when I was a therapist, like when I was doing in-home therapy. Everything I did was from a trauma-informed lens, right? Like my intakes, like what questions do I need to like modify so I'm not re-traumatizing people, right? Like, so or families. Where it became really difficult was like when I was a direct service worker or when I was a supervisor and doing management stuff, right? Like, so from a management perspective, like I definitely needed to reevaluate, like, what does it mean to be trauma informed as a supervisor and as a upper management, like writing grants, etc. Like, I really had to take a step back. Like, is this grant like appropriate? Are we doing mission drift? Is this like going away from like what we're supposed to be doing with our young people and our families? Um, and another thing as an admin, and I always felt really wrong. I don't know if wrong is the word, but like a lot of people call it trauma porn, where like we funders want to hear stories, and they want to hear stories from our young people. So like I was always really hesitant in having our young people tell their story if they weren't ready, right? And I think that was something, another part from a trauma informed lens, like how are we not doing that, right? Like in order to get funding, right? I think that's been something in my work that like everyone at every level in an organization needs to look at things from a trauma informed lens, because everything that we do is impacting young people. And even my direct service work, right? Like I was like, when I just remember when I was like fresh and young, 22, and like I just expected young people to follow my orders. Like if I said curfews at 10, like your curfews at 10, right? Like, and not really understanding the implications of what that actually like being authoritarian and to young people, and how that impacted the work, right? Like, so all of that, like I really do think that like everything at every level of every organization, we need to look at things from a trauma informed lens. It's and it's not just the case manager or the therapist. It is everyone, right? Like from admin, the person sitting at the desk answering phones, people making decisions on grants, all the way down to like the rest of staff. I don't know. Did that answer your question, Asia?
Oh, definitely, it did. And going back to when we tell our stories, I think I told my story for the first time probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But years before that, I was asked to tell my story for a youth service organization I was working for. And I'm like, okay, cool. I love giving back. So when I started writing my story out, all of these different emotions started pouring out of me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not ready to stand in front of people and tell my story. More so having the mindset of from when we were little, you do not tell business. Now here I am telling, quotation mark, my business. So it was just a lot that came with that. And I think if we are asking individuals to tell their story, an incentive or a compensation, that's one thing. But when we are asking individuals to tell their stories, we need to see what they truly need. Because when I did tell my story, there was no therapy services offered. There was no, no follow-up. It was all about, okay, this is good for us, and we can use, it helps with fundraising and so many other things, but we just have to be conscious of when someone is being vulnerable enough to tell their story. We need to just make sure checking in.
100%. Oh, and Lucy Simmons agrees, and I think that's something that like I noticed too, because I think like from a trauma informed perspective, I was like, we shouldn't be exploiting people, right? Like, because like what you described is exploitation, right? Like we're gonna use you to get money, but then we're not gonna give you supports, right? Like when you need it, right? And I think that's something that the nonprofit world needs to come to terms with. And how do we then become how do we become more trauma informed in that aspect, right? Like, and I think that like, yeah, you're right. Like if a young person isn't ready, we shouldn't have them tell their story. And then it takes years. And like I think Asia, you know this, for me, like I was homeless when I was in my teens, living out of my car, and now I'm in like in 40, right? And I think like now I've had time to process. I wasn't ready to tell my story until like I was in my 30s, right? Like because it was such a crazy time for me, and like I just never told anyone, right? Like I just and I think you're right. Like everyone's, and I think you said this in the previous slide. Everyone's time it looks different for everyone, right? Like in how they're gonna do, how they're gonna process. And I think that's something that like we need to be really aware. And if someone's not ready, we should not force, and that onus of like knowing whether or not the person is ready does not fall on that person. It falls on the organization. Yeah, no, exactly, Stephanie. Stephanie wrote in the chat that we need to create supporting environments that allows individuals to feel safe in sharing and supported if they do. 100%. And I think that's where trauma informed, like when we say that, like a lot of organizations say they're trauma informed, but then like I see them do these like I don't want to, they start doing these like small things that are just they're normalized in the nonprofit world, like having young people tell their story, right? It's just normalized. Like people don't think twice about it, but when you really look at it, it's not trauma informed at all, right?
When
Yes.
staff are coming, when you have incoming staff, what does that look like? Because everyone on your team, they can be trauma informed, but when staff are coming in, are they? One example, there was when I was working in transitional living, there was a young lady who was homeless youth mothers and their children, but there was a young lady who wouldn't follow the rules. So the staff member, she was clapping her hands. She was like, hey, I need you to do this. So this was a trigger for the young lady because every time her mother abused her, she would always clap her hands before. So the youth responded. Now, there was no way the staff would have known, hey, this is a trigger, which is why we just have to be trained and understand that there are so many different levels of being trauma informed and how we speak to individuals in our day-to-day lives. Maybe she talks with her hands, maybe she claps her hands, but this can be detrimental to someone, to anyone who suffers from PTSD or a number of other things. And I think it's very important to kind of pause. And what I mean by that is when I was working in the drop-in center, there was a young guy, I felt disrespected. He called me the B word. So that has always been a trigger for me. And when I was younger, it was essentially a fighting word. So it's important to know thyself and do no harm. So when I asked him to leave because he called me out of my name, he was leaving, but as he was leaving, he kept calling me out of my name. So when I was responding, I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. You can continue to walk and get out and, kind of unconsciously antagonizing him. But at the end of the day, even though he was still being disrespectful, on the other end, he was doing what I asked him to do. He was leaving. So in that moment, I should have paused. I didn't need to say absolutely anything because he was exiting the space. And working with youth for so long, I had never dealt with my trauma. And this was an issue, but I also didn't understand. I didn't understand why I needed to. So for a long time, I'm in this service field. I'm serving, families, community, youth, but I'm not dealing with my trauma. And even with 3 degrees, they preach, they instill it within you, self-care, self-care, self-care. But I think even through all of these degrees, I didn't fully, truly understand what self-care meant, because when you are passionate about something and you are, quotation mark, trying to save the world, you don't really have that time to practice that self-care, but you have to make that time. And even if that means stepping back, because if you are working with individuals to help them succeed, to help them heal, but you are not healing yourself, you will do them a disservice. And that can come out in many ways if you don't understand your triggers, if you are not okay.
Yeah. No, yes. I think we could like do a whole like series like every month for the next like 5 years, talking like revisiting a piece of trauma the entire time. But I like what Samantha Anderson wrote about like imagine in the classroom. Yes,
absolutely.
And like, oh my God, I like don't even get me. I think that's a whole other webinar we need to start, Asia. Like, how do you become trauma informed in the classroom when you have like 30 individuals who are have different life experiences, are going through so many different things, right? And like, because for me, like, from the school, like, I wish someone prevented some of the things in my family household and like in high school, right? Like, or middle school, right? Because then like it might have prevented like our family homelessness later on in life, right? Like, so it's just like, yeah. Oh, all right. Anyway, so sorry, who was it? Was it Samantha? Yeah, sorry, Samantha. That's we won't touch upon it this time, but it's definitely on our radar of like to dig deeper in, and I think it's definitely something that needs to be discussed. Like, how can schools be a thing of prevention and help young people prevent their crises, right? Like, and et cetera. But I think like what you were talking about, Asia, really is about like, what is stress, what is trauma, because we're all dealing with all of this stuff constantly, right? Like, so, right, like, and I also want to just like also give terms, these terms, they're very, in the trauma world, there's a lot of terms, a lot of different terms that sometimes mean the same thing. So I just want to put a caveat. In the toolkit, we do reference where we got these this information from. So just an FYI that like we do have the references, but like you might have heard some of these things said a little bit differently depending on like who, where you got your last trauma informed discussion from. But like, you know, there is stress and trauma, and sometimes like there's slight nuances to them, right? Like, so that positive stress, like that good stress that like we get those dopamines for doing something we get excited about, right? Like, and that's positive stress. Like the hormones are rushing through our bodies, and like we're excited to do something. And then there's like tolerable stress, right? Like, and and these are some of those stresses that everyone has. Excuse me. We experience a lot of these adversities. Like everyone in the world experiences the loss of a family. Also, just another caveat: when we say family, it's family of choice, right? Like, so it's whoever you identify as your family. Serious illness or injury, natural disasters. Active terrorism. So like when we like all experience it, right? Like, and I think some of it, the word tolerable kind of, for me, the word tolerable is a little bit of a misnomer, because I don't know if it's tolerable for everyone. But anyway, that's just neither here or there. And then there's that toxic stress, right? Like the and it's the most dangerous type of stress, and it's actually it's probably the stress that our young people are dealing with. So this like this constant exposure of non-normative experiences, right? Like, so these non-normative ones, like sexual abuse, physical abuse, right? Like that they're constantly dealing with this, neglect, right? Like where they're not getting food, not going to the dentist, and like and all of this has effects, right? Like on their learning, right? So as Samantha was saying about like schools, all of this like toxic stress that they might be dealing with is going to impact them at school. It's going to impact them how they take their tests, how they're going to focus in school. It's going to affect their behavior. It's going to their health across the lifespan, right? Like the obesity increases with the more toxic stress you have. Likelihood of usage of illicit drugs increases, right? So all of that are those types of stress. So I think it's important so we know that like stress can be helpful, but toxic stress is also can have extreme adverse effects, right? Like, and I think that's where like a lot of our young people who are living in that constant exposure to abuse, neglect, or these non-normative experiences, right? Like are just having an impact on their lives, right? And I know Asia, you're going to go over the trauma, the types of trauma.
Yes, so there are several different types of trauma. The main ones you all may hear about is acute, chronic, and complex. So with acute trauma, this results from a single incident. It may have led to PTSD, but even if it didn't, this would involve one event. So maybe like a car accident, a natural disaster, workplace injury. Now, an individual can have multiple experiences of trauma, maybe 3 or 4 car accidents, for example, but only one really led to the cause of the PTSD and its symptoms. Chronic trauma includes multiple traumatic events. They can be the same type, So abuse repeatedly as a child, or different types involved in several natural disasters. Complex trauma is very multiple traumatic events, often invasive. So traumatic events were perpetrated by a caregiver or another trusted individual, causing a sense of betrayal. Many of these symptoms can include a sense of guilt or shame, dissociation, difficulty regulating emotions, a sense of hopelessness. These symptoms can be seen with all traumas, but it's typically not associated with chronic and acute. And then we have complex developmental trauma. So still complex trauma, but that developmental piece, repetitive trauma as youth. Vicarious trauma is trauma that service providers may experience. So helpers that are exposed to others' traumatic experiences in a nutshell. So when exposed, it can alter our confidence in making a difference. So an example, you can feel anxious, guilt, helplessness. I also work in the schools, and I don't work in the schools as a social worker or as a therapist. I'm in the schools as a mentor. But when I tell you, I cannot get away from doing QPR assessments, it's serious with the youth struggling with suicidal ideation. So QPR, question, persuade, refer. Everybody in your organization should be trained on this. So take note on that. But when I sit down and I have these conversations, or I do these QPR assessments, so one day I did three QPR assessments, and afterwards I felt like I worked like a 15-hour shift. I was so mentally drained, and it's like, we know we do a lot of good in this world, but hearing the details of these stories with our children, it just really affects you, which is why when you feel that, or even before you feel that vicarious trauma, you have to really, really pour into yourself and your self-care. So what do you do after, even if you're having a conversation with a friend, let's say they're dealing with a lot of trauma and it's weighing on you, what do you do to make sure you're okay? You can sleep and wake up the next day and you know what, it'll go away. But it can also lead to more serious issues and concerns. And then we have historical and or intergenerational trauma. So this refers to the cumulative emotional harm of an individual or generation caused by a traumatic experience, such as war, slavery, racism, colonization, loss of culture, etc. I remember I was in elementary school when 9/11 occurred, and we stopped everything what we were doing to support one another. And I really didn't understand it being so young, because I'm like, well, I don't have anyone, who I lost because of this, but just the way the culture shifted in the school for us to kind of just take that moment. It was huge for me, and I'll always remember it. So if things are occurring, whether it's terrorism, police brutality, or anything, it's okay to support one another in the workplace. It's okay to support students in the school, because the children are not okay. The work cannot trump mental health. Students are losing friends to gun violence, back in school the next day. Hey, we got to get this test done. It's about the results. Coming back from a pandemic, it's the test scores, the academics, all of that. But we are missing very, very, very important. We are losing a lot of youth. We are losing a lot of staff. People are not okay. And it's the quote I always hear. Hey, when you come here, you leave everything at the door. No, we are human. I can't leave my pain at the door. I can't leave my trauma at the door. I can't only rely on my therapist or a social worker to help me through this, because I am in this space. I am in this school for majority of the time. Our children spend a lot of time in schools. Everyone in the school, between the janitor, the teachers, everyone needs to be trauma informed. Everyone needs to support one another.
Ooh,
sorry.
That one. No, do not apologize. I was like, I felt your passion, right, in that, and it was, you're absolutely right, which is why, like, like we continue to talk about trauma, being trauma informed, and we continue to talk about this because you're right, it's not happening, right? Like, and I think like for a lot of people on this, right, on this webinar, right, like there were over 200 people registered, and like ask yourself like why did you register? And then in your organizations, right, like because like you read the title, right, like it's like right, like and if your organization was already trauma informed and you were already doing it, you wouldn't need this webinar, right? But we need it. We need to continue talking about this because you're right, Asia. It's not happening. Like, and schools being a really good example of that. Like when I walk in schools, right? Like and there's all this stuff going on, and like and some of that language is being used, that negative language is from the adults, right, like from a janitor, from the lunch lady, from the teacher, right, like that, like they're not bought into this trauma informed, being trauma informed. And then our young people, especially our young people who are experiencing homelessness, right, like that complex trauma, complex developmental trauma, that's what's happening, right, like they're experiencing at home. It might be family violence, it might be substance use, right? They're experiencing all of this, and then they're coming into our schools, and there's another level of like trauma, bullying, and like and then this like other aspect of like we need to focus on test scores and not focus on the person, right? There are, and shout out to the schools that are doing amazing work, and to the McKinney-Vento liaisons that I work really closely with. Like there are amazing people that are doing amazing work, but I think to what you were saying, Asia, it's not trauma-informed care is not about individual. It's about like the whole system needs to be trauma informed, right? Like everyone needs to be on the same page, and I think that's what I heard from what you were talking about, like, and like why we review the different types of trauma and stress, because we need to know it, right? Lexi Sandoval, 100%, it's culture, right? You know what? That's another way, Asia, that like, how do we then, that's cultural change. Anyway, I need to put a note on that. Thanks, Lexi. I need to put a note on that because I think that's another webinar, right? Like it's not about trainings anymore. It's like now we need to like take trauma informed and implement it. And now we need to go from like how to change how do we do cultural change? But I'll take notes.
Training,
but so,
we're not
yeah.
checking off a box. So this is a training, we can say we did it. No, this is a long-term change.
Yeah, 100%. And and then I also just want to go over like the adverse childhood experiences. It was a study that was done, I believe in like the late 90s, early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. It looked at like a lot of young people from a particular hospital system, Kaiser Permanente, and looking at this like questionnaire that they gave out, right? Like about like their childhood experiences and like the adverse childhood experiences that people have experienced. And 45% of that, or at least from these estimates, have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, right? And almost all youth with one or more adverse childhood experience had these experiences before the age of 14, right? So we know that like, yeah, life these like life stressors are happening at young ages, and like when should we be intervening? Our current system, right? At least like from my perspective, we don't intervene until they're much older, but we can intervene at a much younger stage and prevent some of this. And then even like when we look at young people experiencing homelessness, their ACEs scores are much higher, right? And I do want to say that like having a higher childhood ACE score, right? Like you do take the survey, does give you a score, and if you have a higher score and it's untreated, then the likelihood of you experience some adverse outcome later in life is higher, right? And I do want to just put that caveat. It's the untreated, right? Because we can treat these, right? Like we can treat trauma. We can help young people, right? It's whether or not the system is going to do that.
Definitely. Adverse outcomes, like you said, come from untreated trauma, unhealed trauma, unexplainable anger, sleeplessness, irritability, anxiety, panic attacks, so much more. When I was younger, probably, I think in elementary, I never knew what anxiety was, but I was always in a constant anxious state. I was always in a panic state. So if I was walking to the store, if there was anybody on the same street as me, I would have to go, if I was by myself, I would have to go another way to get to that store. It took me a long time to cross a street. Even if the car could be so far away, or I could not even see a car, but I still could not cross that street. So just being in a constant panic state, constantly being afraid, constantly being paranoid, constantly not being okay, going through the different systems, going through school, going through, like, no one, even all the way up into high school, no one pulled me to the side to ask me, hey, are you okay? Not what's going on, because if you asked me what's going on with how I was raised, we stay tricking DCS systems. I won't tell you what's going on, because in a result, me and my 5 brothers and sisters are going to be put in the system and no longer have a relationship with our Father. So this is how I was trained. But there are other ways to get through to youth, and how you ask the question and how you approach them is very important. But this is why we need to be trauma informed. Trauma happens, as Andrew stated, we all experience trauma. We need to be there when people need us, and everyone needs to be trauma informed. It's literally to the point where you can save lives. I work with some high school students, and when I started off the mentoring group, I asked them, because no one wanted to talk about anything. We put kids in these groups. Hey, let's express yourself. I have trust issues. You want me to just express myself around 10 other people, and I have not built that rapport with them. So taking that time to just kind of build that rapport on an individual level. And a lot of times I think we overthink rapport. I was at a middle school dance, and there was a young lady, and another girl was looking at her crazy. And she was like, well, my mom always said, if someone looks at me crazy, I need to handle it. I need to beat them up. In that moment, she did not know me, but I took about 5 minutes to build rapport. I took about 5 minutes to just be real with her. The last thing you want to do is disobey your parent. But in this situation, how you respond can make or break your entire life. So which route do you want to take? So in the moments, sometimes you got to kind of just go with, I don't want to say go with the flow, but if you have the tools you need, the trainings you need, the professional development knowledge of what you've learned, and you're just including that in each and every space. A lot of times it will be trial and error, but then a lot of times, probably more times, you'll make a huge positive difference in the lives of the individuals you're serving.
No, thanks, Asia. And I think one of the things that, like, I've noticed too, right, like, is like the ACEs doesn't define people, right? Like it's a tool that helps you have a better understanding, right? And then intervene. And I think that's like with you and that young person, right? Like this young person was going through something. We don't know what exactly it is, right? But like in her family home, like violence is normalized, right?
Yes.
Like if someone looks at you crazy, you beat them, right? Like so something's going on, but like we intervene, right? Like because you could have easily said, you know what, you're a risk at this party, you need to leave, and we're just gonna escort you out, right? And she probably would have escalated, right? And I think that's where, like, how can we intervene to help versus like being punitive? because oftentimes we're so reactive, so punitive, right, that like we definitely need to take that step back. And the ACEs being something that helps us understand and helps us decide how are we going to intervene. I think that's important, right? Like, and again, like I think what you said, unhealed, if you're not healing from these traumas, that's when you experience those adverse outcomes. So that's why we need to intervene first so people can heal and be treated for what they're going on, what happened to them, right? And viewing trauma as like a disease versus like a label, right? Like, because like, right, like people go to the doctors and they get treated for this. Like our young people, we know that they've experienced this trauma, and like we shouldn't be we should be treating them. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Definitely.
Yes, and then I think we went over this about complex trauma. And oh no, this is you. Go for it.
No,
Sorry.
you're fine. So I mentioned earlier, working in facilities that serve houseless youth or youth identified as at risk. I witnessed several occurrences of power struggles and staff becoming frustrated when youth didn't follow the rules. Often we were able to get to the bottom of what was going on, but then many other times we were not. It's important to understand the impact of trauma. There is always a why. Patience is key. So let's say I need Johnny to get this task done, I need him to get this task done so that I can get my program numbers in. I have deadlines, same thing I was saying about the schools. But no, what is the reason this is not getting done and not going to, well, you know what, they're lazy, they don't want anything out of life, they're just a lost cause. I literally hear this. They are just a lost cause. But no, they're not on your time, and you cannot rush the healing process. If I'm asking you, hey, I need you to get your room clean by 5 p.m. I come in the room, okay, the room isn't clean, but they did fold up 3 pieces of laundry. Okay, well, let's praise that. You know, let's make those moments celebrated, because a lot of our children, they are not being celebrated. The small successes, okay, well, you have all of these A's, but what's up with this B? No, like we are damaging individuals without even necessarily knowing. Without trauma-informed care, without that type of approach, youth can become re-traumatized. It can become difficult to build trust, and youth can ultimately feel misunderstood. So the authoritative approach, the demanding approach to serving individuals, it can definitely be detrimental in their lives. I know when I started my first degree, I got in human services, and before I went into human services, I didn't understand parenting styles. I didn't understand trauma. I didn't understand anything. So when I started these courses, I'm like, I've been doing it all wrong, because I operated with my children in an authoritative way. What I say goes, and you literally cannot say anything back because I'm always right. Corporal punishment is the only answer. This I would not have known differently had I not went to school. So we think it's common sense. We think it'll be a day and night difference when parents get this knowledge, but it takes a commitment, and it can take a very long time. And sometimes people may not truly get it, but you plant those seeds, and then you see what comes from it. But I wanted to ask you, Andrew, when have you seen providers get frustrated when interacting with youth who are going through complex trauma?
Yeah, I think you highlighted a really good one, like, right, which is like staff members and authority figures, right? Like when we become authoritarian in our programs, right? And I think that's a very good example, right? Like instead of working in partnership, instead of working like, hey, let's figure this out together. And yes, and I've done the overnight staff, and you know, you might be the only one, and there's like 10 young people. It is hard, right? Like I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that like let's start rethinking how we approach things, right? And maybe doing a little bit things differently. I definitely seen that, like forced interaction with peers is something that like I see a lot in programs, right? Like, and I think this is where like we're all going to watch a movie together and we all have to be silent, we all have to, and it's like, but they all have different like ideas and like things that they want to do, and like, right, and it's awkward sometimes, especially in a shelter. I remember like when I did shelter, it's like we have like 4 new young people, and it's like, yeah, including them in. And I guess like for me, like, you know, it's more about like how can we do things that are more interactive. Like, yes, movies are great, but no one talks to each other, no one like interacts, right? Like, so that's why like I always liked doing like um I all the young people in the shelter used to say like or the transitional living program is like, here comes Andrew just making us do some silly thing, right? Like, cause, and I would do things that like it wasn't something they had to physically come together, like we're gonna cook or we're gonna bake. And I'm a huge adventure therapy experiential learning person, so like I would do like blind baking, right? Like, and it's funny, right? Like, because like you have a partner and like the other person is blindfolded, and your partner, it's working on communication skills, and your partner tells you the ingredients that you need to put into the bowl, but you're blind and they can't help you. Like, you need to find, like, so they have to tell like, oh, the flour is to the left, and like it's a lot of people roll their eyes because like people are like, oh, I don't want to do this, but at the end everyone is like laughing because like you spill things, and like it's it's a fun time, right? And I say that because it levels the playing field for everyone, because that way there is no because everyone's laughing, everyone's at the same level. So it's like sometimes like when we do like group sports like basketball, right, like there's people that are really athletic and there's people that are not athletic, and then it creates this dynamic, right? Like, and how do we then like diffuse that dynamic, right? And do things that are a little bit different, right? I think even like how trauma also like sometimes with I see this and I saw this a lot in our transitional living program, where we had these expectations that was just like not attainable, right? Like uh we had this thing about everyone should go to college, but not everyone was college ready, and like they were also going through these complex trauma that they haven't even processed yet, but yet we were like filling out FAFSA forms for them because the checklist told me to fill out a FAFSA. It was just crazy, right? Like that, like I could have spent more time helping them deal with what they were currently going, instead of um, like, oh, this is a requirement because this funder wants it and you need to go to college. And actually, caveat, a lot of them went to college and then failed out and then just had debt. There was a few exceptions that like young people were ready, but some people are not ready, right? Like, and we shouldn't be like, we should reevaluate our program. Like, what are rules and what are expectations, right? Like, and all of that, and then also like there are challenges. And I'm looking at the time, and even though we practice, like I'm like, oh my god, we have not gone over like the other half of our slides. So I because of time, just wanted to say that like Asia and I are always willing to have conversations about being trauma informed in any of your organizations or communities. So feel free, like if you want something more targeted, more detailed, feel free to reach out in the consultation page. Our awesome development person, Carrie, will probably reach out. But I also do want to show you like where all this information does lie, right? So I will be putting in, it is a toolkit within our website. So I put the link, oh no, I didn't say it to everyone. The link in the chat. It is, and then also you'll be receiving, it's going to be in one of our newsletters about it. But everything like what is trauma and stress, it is a web-based toolkit. This toolkit was written right? Applause to Asia and Key, right? So this entire webpage would not have been possible if it wasn't for our NYAC members and our NYAC alum, right? And again, so appreciative of both Asia and Key. They are my MSW teammates at the network. So we all have our MSWs and love being social workers. But again, they wrote this and from their knowledge and their experience, what they've learned as social workers. And then, like I said before, all the references are at the bottom of each page. So you know where this information comes, because trauma-informed care, depending on who you're reading, is a little bit different. So we talk about trauma and stress, adverse childhood experiences, the complex trauma, just the basics of 101 trauma-informed, and then like some screening and assessments. So if you click on these links, and of course it would not work on the day that I am clicking through it, but okay, yes, it does work. So, right, like there's like different types of screenings, and we have links to them, different screening tools. We did try to pick ones that are free, so that way you didn't have to pay for them. So just a FYI on those. So just a trying to put as many big overview of being trauma informed and what does that mean on that webpage. We do have 5 minutes left, and I know if there's any questions, please put them in the chat. I know Eddie is looking at them. If there are any questions in the last 5 minutes that Asia and I can answer for you all. Man, Asia, we were so good. People have no questions. Yeah. So hopefully, oh, go for it, Asia.
Oh, no, I think earlier when we were talking about parenting styles, I think I said the wrong one. The authoritative figure you want to be. The authoritarian is the one I was speaking on, of how I was raised. So I just wanted to clear that up. And also,
okay.
Nadine Burks, she has a YouTube TED Talks, How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across the Lifetime. Nadine Burke Harris, I definitely recommend that you watch this. It's very, very powerful, and it goes through detail. It goes in detail about ACEs and the effects it has on not only our mental health, but most importantly, our physical health. I have a lot of different mental and physical health concerns, all rooting from the different ACEs I've experienced. And then I also want to say, and I know Andrew said it earlier, feel free to reach out to us. I am an open book. I think between education and then my personal experiences, I think it helps when being in these different spaces and seeing things that maybe some other individuals don't necessarily see. If that makes sense. So just feel free to contact us.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense, right? Like I think like sometimes like trauma informed is very clinical based, right? Like, but our work in the homeless youth space, not everything that we do is clinical, right? Like I think like in a shelter or a transitional living program, we have overnight staff. We have who aren't doing the clinical work, but doing more case management, right? And I think like you're right. Like I think that's why these are really helpful about. Oh, someone did have a question. Sorry, I didn't look at the question side, which was, I'm in a shelter. Sarah said, I'm in a shelter residential setting, wondering how you worked around regulations that might not be trauma informed. Okay, so yes, so regulations that are not trauma informed, right? And I think a lot of it was when, for me, when I was in a residential area program, and we dealt with child welfare young people, there was a lot of stipulations that were put in there by court orders and mandates, right? So I think one of the ways that we got around it, right? Like, I think like if that young person does have an advocate, right? Like, I think that is if they have a court appointed special advocate like a CASA or our guardian ad litem, a GAL, right? Like I think it's just making them aware that like this doesn't work for this young person, right? And I think that is something. Yes, there is some advocacy involved, right? And I think something else that like I've noticed, Sarah, right, like is really working with your staff and the supervisors. Is this a rule or an expectation, right? Like, or is this something, right? Like, because there are differences, right? Like for us, like I always look at like rules need to be about safety, right? Like, and then expectations are like we're going to help you to get that, and then also like what and I know it's probably nuanced, Sarah, right? Like, so if there's a specific like thing you want to work through, like if there's feel free to like email us, right? Like, and we can really like work through that like specific issue you might have in your in your organization. But I think that's like it's not a 100% like we're living in gray, right? Like, and I think that's where it gets funky, that like there's just so much gray. Anyway, so I'll stop there. And thank you, Asia, for a lovely discussion. This is where I really love my job, because it doesn't feel like a job. It's just like you and I are just having a discussion, and I wish I had some tea with me. It's like we're just drinking coffee and talking about our work. So thank you so much, Asia. Thank you everyone for participating today. And again, reach out, because like this is just the start, right? Like this is not a end all be all. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a good night.